Hello there and welcome to the Slow 100. It is good to have you here tonight, wherever here happens to be for you. Maybe you have had a long day and your thoughts are still moving faster than you would like them to. Maybe you have been awake for hours already, quietly waiting for sleep to come back to you. Either way, tonight is for you. There is nothing you need to do now but rest. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears and let your jaw soften. Let your hands go loose and let the bed take the whole weight of you. Tonight, we are going to wander slowly through a great ship, 100 small facts at a time. We will begin in the shipyard, among the rivets and the cranes and the men working in the dark. Then we will move inside through the rooms nobody expected on a ship. We will sit down to the meals and meet the people who sailed and the people who worked below. And in the end, we will go out onto the quiet ocean itself. Each fact stands alone, so there is no thread you have to keep hold of. You will not lose your place if you drift away in the middle of one. Wherever sleep finds you tonight, you have missed nothing at all. If you hear the first 10 of these, that is plenty. If you hear none of them, that is better still. So settle in, let your eyes grow heavy, and let the counting begin aboard the floating city. She was the largest moving object that human hands had ever built. It is easy to hear that and picture only a number written on a page, but she was a thing you had to walk a long way to see the end of. When she stood finished in the yard, she rose some 11 stories above the water. A person standing at her bow could not pick out a friend waving at her stern. She weighed more than 46,000 tons, and every ton of her had been shaped by hand. There was nothing else in the world that size that could move under its own power. Cathedrals were grander, perhaps, but cathedrals stayed exactly where they were put. She was built to carry all of that weight out onto open water, gently and at speed. Imagine her sitting quiet in the yard at dusk, still and enormous, waiting for the sea. She was designed, it is said, on the back of a dinner conversation. Great ships usually begin with committees, with drawings, and with long arguments over money. This one is said to have begun over a meal in a London house in the summer of 1907. Two men sat together after dinner, a shipping chairman and a shipbuilder who knew each other well. Between them, they sketched out 3 ships larger than anything then afloat, not faster than their rivals, but larger, steadier, and far more comfortable to travel in. Speed belonged to other lines, and they were welcome to keep it. What these 2 men wanted was a ship people would choose for the pleasure of the crossing. Somewhere in that quiet room over coffee, the outline of her was drawn on paper. She began as a conversation, the way most large things quietly do. She was built alongside a sister ship, the 2 of them rising side by side. Most ships are born alone in a slip of their own, with every eye in the yard upon them. She was not. In the yard at Belfast, 2 great slipways were cleared to hold the pair together. Olympic rose first a few months ahead, and Titanic rose steadily beside her. Workers could look up from one hull and see the other taking exactly the same shape. The same drawings, the same steel, the same men climbing the same tall scaffolds. A third sister was planned to follow them along in time. It made the yard a strange place to stand, with two vast hulls leaning over the sheds. Belfast grew used to living in their shadow, the way a town grows used to a hill. Two great shapes against the sky, quiet on a Sunday, waiting. The gantry built to hold her was the largest steel structure of its kind in the world. Before you can build a ship that big, you have to build something bigger to build it inside. So the yard raised a great steel frame straight over both of the slipways. It stood more than 200 feet high and covered the ground of several city blocks. Inside it ran electric lifts, walkways, and cranes that could swing steel plate over the hulls. Men rode up in cages to work at the height of a church spire. From the far side of the river it looked like scaffolding thrown around a cathedral, and in a way it was, though this cathedral was meant to sail away. When the ships were finished and gone, the gantry stayed behind, standing empty. A frame of dark iron against a Belfast sky, waiting for the next one. It took about 3 million rivets to hold her together. That number is very easy to say and very hard to picture. Think of it as a small metal button every few inches spread across cores of steel plate. Together those rivets weighed something over 1,000 tons, all on their own. Each one arrived at the hull glowing red from a small portable furnace. It was dropped into its hole, hammered flat, and left to cool and shrink in place. As it cooled, it pulled the plates tighter together, sealing the seam behind it. That is the whole secret of an iron ship, thousands of small grips holding as one. No single rivet mattered very much, and all of them mattered enormously together. If you ever see her plating in a photograph, look at the neat rows of studs. Some of those rivets were driven by hand, one at a time. Hydraulic machines did most of the work along her long, flat sides, but her bow and her stern curved too sharply for the big machines to reach into, so those seams were closed the older way, by squads of 4 or 5 men. A boy heated the rivets in a small coke furnace until they glowed a soft orange. Another caught them in a bucket and passed them along, still burning hot. One man held the rivet steady from behind, while 2 more swung their hammers. They were paid by the rivet, and they worked in a rhythm you could hear across the yard. It is said the sound carried over the rooftops of the streets nearby, a slow, steady ringing all day long, like a town full of blacksmiths. She was held together by men who worked much of the time in near darkness. We picture shipbuilding as an outdoor thing, all sky and rivers and open air. A great deal of it was not. Deep inside the hull, in the double bottom and the tank tops, there was no daylight at all. Men crawled through spaces barely tall enough to kneel in, carrying lamps ahead of them. The noise in there was enormous, hammer on steel inside what amounted to a steel drum. Many of them lost some of their hearing and thought very little of it at the time. They worked in a yard that employed some 15,000 people in those years. Nearly every street in that part of the city sent someone in through its gates. When the horn sounded at the end of a shift, thousands walked home in the blue evening light. Her hull was given a special coating of paint before she was ever launched. Bare steel does not like sea air, and she had a long fitting out still ahead of her. So her plating was sealed against the weather while she was still sitting on land. Below the waterline, she wore an anti-fouling coat meant to keep weed and barnacles away. Above it, she wore the deep black of her line, with a thin band of gold along her side. Her sister Olympic had been given a coat of light grey for her own launch day. That was done so that photographs would show her lines clearly against the dark water. Titanic needed no such help, since those pictures had already been taken once, so she was painted plainly, in her working colours and left to dry. Black steel in a grey yard, catching what little light there was. She slid into the water in about a minute. Years of drawing and building, and then a single unhurried minute of movement. On a bright Belfast afternoon, the last of the timber shores were knocked away by hand. A hydraulic trigger was released, and she began to move under her own great weight. She went stern first, gathering speed, and the crowd along the river went quiet. There was no champagne and no christening, because her line simply never named ships that way. She went, and the water took her, and heavy drag chains slowed her down again. Around 100,000 people are thought to have watched from the banks that day. What went into the water was only a hull, empty and unfinished, with no engines and no funnels, just a shape, floating for the very first time, waiting to be filled. 22 tons of soap and tallow were used to grease her slipway. It is a homely detail for so grand a moment, and that is exactly why it is lovely. She weighed some 26,000 tons on the day that she was launched. To let her move at all, the ways beneath her were dressed with soft grease. Tallow, train oil, and soft soap were spread thick along the timbers by hand. On a warm morning, the yard is said to have smelled faintly of a laundry. Men laid it on in the quiet hours before she went, working on their knees. Then they stood back and let gravity do all of the rest. If you had stood there, you would have felt the ground tremble faintly beneath your feet, and a wall of steel would have slid past you on soap, on its way to becoming the floating city. She was nearly 3 football fields long from one end to the other. Numbers do not really carry a size like that, so try it another way instead. If you set her upright on her stern, she would have towered over almost any building of her day. She measured just under 900 feet along the length of her hull. Her beam, which is the width of her at the middle, was about 92 feet across. A person walking her full length and back covered close to 1/3 of a mile. Passengers used to do exactly that after dinner, slowly for the air. Her promenade decks were long enough that you could lose sight of your own companions, and all of that was built to move through open water at better than 20 knots, a shape that large, gliding along and leaving barely a sound behind her. Her rudder alone weighed more than 100 tons. That is the part of her that nobody ever saw, hanging deep beneath the stern. It stood over 78 feet tall and was cast in 6 separate pieces. Those pieces were joined together afterwards, since no foundry could pour a thing that size at once. Moving it was far beyond any human arm, so steam did all of the work. 2 engines below drove the steering gear, and the wheel on the bridge only told them what to do. A turn of a polished wooden wheel and 100 tons swung slowly through the water. Ships of that size turn gracefully, in long, wide arcs that take their own good time. They lean into a curve the way a broad river bends around a hill. Somewhere under the black water, that great blade moved, patient and unhurried. Her anchor was pulled through the streets by a team of 20 horses. The center anchor was the largest, then forged anywhere, weighing nearly 16 tons on its own. It was made in the English Midlands, in a town of chain makers and forges. Getting it to the railway meant hauling it on a wagon through the middle of that town. So 20 Shire horses were harnessed in front of it, and everyone came out to watch. Children were let out of school, and photographs were taken in the thin winter light. The horses walked it barely a mile, and that took the best part of a morning. From there it went by rail to the docks and by ship across to Belfast. It is a strange and lovely picture. Iron of that size moving at a walking pace. Horses, breath steaming in cold air, and an anchor going slowly to the sea. She had 4 funnels, but only 3 of them ever carried smoke. Look at any photograph of her, and the 4 stand evenly spaced along her spine. They were her signature, the thing that made her recognizable from several miles away. The forward 3 took the smoke from her boiler rooms, 29 boilers in all. Smoke rose from them in 3 soft columns whenever she was underway. The 4th carried no boiler smoke at all, and never once had. Each funnel was wide enough to drive 2 carriages through it side by side. They were painted in the buff and black of her line and raked slightly backwards. That backward tilt was there to suggest speed, even while she sat perfectly still. From a distance, they read as 4 dark strokes drawn against the evening sky, 4 tall columns of a floating hall, standing quietly above the sea. The 4th funnel was added largely for the look of the thing. 3 funnels would have done all the work, and everybody in the yard knew it. But passengers of that era counted funnels the way we might now count engines. 3 funnels meant a good ship, and 4 meant the very best afloat. So a 4th was drawn in, matched to its neighbours, and raised carefully into place. It was not entirely idle, since it drew stale air up from the galleys and engine spaces. Warm kitchen air rose quietly through it, while the other 3 carried smoke. It is a small vanity, and a very human one, and it is hard to mind it. She was dressed for the part that she was going to play, and the sky above her looked all the better for that extra dark column. Her engines stood as tall as a house. Below the passenger decks, in a room the size of a small church, sat 2 vast engines. Each rose about 30 feet from its bed plate up to the top of its cylinders. Men worked on walkways at 3 different levels, simply to reach all the parts of them. Behind those 2 sat a 3rd engine, a turbine, which used the steam the others had finished with. Nothing in that arrangement was wasted, not even the tired steam at the end of it. It went from the boilers to the big engines, then to the turbine, then to the condensers. Together, they turned 3 propellers quietly, hour after hour after hour. It was patient and ingenious engineering, and almost none of the passengers ever saw it. They felt only a faint, steady hum through the soles of their shoes. She burned hundreds of tons of coal every single day. At sea, she was fed something like 650 tons in a day and a night. That coal came up from bunkers along her sides, hauled in barrows by men called trimmers. It went into 159 furnaces spread across 29 great boilers. The furnaces had to be fed, raked, and cleared in steady rotation, hour after hour. A ship like that does not run on the turn of a switch. She runs on shovels, thousands of them, all night and all day long. The coal she took aboard before sailing weighed more than whole ships of the century before, and all of that heat became nothing more visible than a soft, grey plume behind her, a quiet trail of smoke drifting slowly astern across the water. It took an army of men below decks to keep her moving. There were more than 250 in her engine and boiler departments alone. Firemen worked the furnaces, trimmers carried the coal, and greasers tended the moving parts. They worked in watches of 4 hours on and 8 hours off, right around the clock. The boiler rooms ran so hot that the men drank water by the gallon. Ventilation shafts brought cool air down to them from the decks far above. Above them, in the dining saloons, a passenger might never know that they existed, which was rather the point. Every quiet, comfortable hour up in the light was built on shoveling down in the dark. They were mostly young men from the port towns doing hard work they were good at. Below the polished floors, a steady rhythm of iron and heat keeping her going. Her whistles could be heard for miles across the water. They sat high on her 2 forward funnels, 3 great steam whistles to each of them. Each one was about 9 inches across and worked by steam from the boilers below. Only the officers on the bridge could sound them by a lever or a cord. When they sounded, the note came from far down inside her, deep and unhurried. It is said the sound carried some 11 miles on a clear and quiet day. People in the towns around the harbour would look up from their work at it. Ships answered one another in that language, one long note, then another in reply. It was not a warning so much as a greeting between old acquaintances. On a still morning, the sound would roll across flat water and come back faintly, a low voice in the fog telling the world where she was. She carried enough fresh water aboard for a small town. Every person aboard needed water for drinking, for washing, and for the kitchens below. She sailed with great tanks of it stored deep in her hull, hundreds of tons in all. Pipes carried it up through the decks to every pantry and bathroom. That alone would never have lasted a whole crossing with so many people aboard. So she also made her own boiling seawater and catching the steam as it cooled. The same boilers that drove her forward filled the taps in her bathrooms. Water ran hot and cold in the first-class rooms, which was still rare at sea. Even her swimming pool was filled from the ocean and warmed by her own steam. Everything that she needed, she either carried with her or quietly made. That was what people meant when they called her the floating city. She had a swimming pool on board, which was almost unheard of at sea. It sat low down in her, tiled and lit and filled with warmed seawater. The pool measured about 30 feet by 14, with steps leading down at one end. The water was heated by her own boilers, so it stayed pleasantly warm. Only a small handful of ships anywhere in the world had anything like it. First-class passengers could use it for £1 at set hours of the day. Men swam in the morning and women later, as the customs of the time required. Around it stood changing cubicles panelled in dark, polished wood. Imagine the sound of it, water moving gently in a warm room deep inside a moving ship. Outside those walls the ocean went past, and you would never have known. Inside, the light on the water was soft and slow. She had a squash court below decks tucked away near the bottom of the ship. It was a proper court, about 30 feet long, with a spectator's gallery above it. A professional player was carried aboard to give lessons to anyone who wanted them. Half an hour on the court cost a couple of shillings, booked with him in advance. He was a young man from a seaside town in England, and the job suited him well. The court sat so low in the ship that the waterline ran above the players' heads. A game of squash going on quietly beneath the surface of the ocean. The sound of the ball would have echoed off those tall white walls. Above it, other passengers walked the decks and never knew that it was there. A small, bright room far down, warm and busy and hidden. She had Turkish baths on board, decorated like a room in Cairo. This was the fashion of the age, and she took that fashion very seriously. The cooling room was tiled in blue and green with gilded beams running overhead. Bronze lamps hung from the ceiling, pierced so the light fell in patterns on the walls. There were carved teak chairs, red curtains, and low benches made for lying down on. Beyond it lay the hot rooms, the steam room, and a small cold plunge. An attendant waited outside to bring towels and cool drinks when you were done. Passengers came in, sweated gently, then lay wrapped in towels doing nothing at all. It cost about 4 shillings, and it opened to men and women at different hours. It was the most deliberately unhurried room on the entire ship. Warm tile, dim light, and the faint hiss of steam somewhere behind a wall. She had a gymnasium, and standing in it was a mechanical camel. The room sat up on the boat deck, bright and white, with windows onto the sea. Inside were rowing machines, exercise cycles, and a curious apparatus with a dial. There was an electric horse that rose and fell as though gently trotting along. And beside it stood a mechanical camel, which did much the same, with rather more of a lurch. Both were thought excellent for the liver, which was the medical opinion of the day. A cheerful instructor in white flannels showed passengers how to work everything. Children were sometimes allowed in during quieter hours to try the horse for themselves. It is a lovely picture. A camel in a white room in the middle of the ocean, sunlight lying on the floor, and the sea sliding past the windows. Her grand staircase was crowned with a dome of wrought iron and glass. It ran down through several decks, panelled in oak and carved in the English style. The steps were wide and shallow, made for long dresses and unhurried descents. Above it all sat the dome, iron worked into curls with clear glass set between. In daylight, the sun came down through it and lay in soft shapes on the landing, At night, a great gilded chandelier lit the whole well from top to bottom. There were mirrors and polished brass and a deep red carpet underfoot. Small landings opened off it towards the lounge and the reading room. People used to come down it slowly on purpose because everybody else was watching. It was less a staircase than a room you walked through vertically, warm light falling gently through glass, deck after deck, into the heart of her. A carved clock stood at the head of that great staircase. It was set into the oak paneling on the topmost landing, framed by two figures. The carving was called Honor and Glory Crowning Time, which was very much the taste of the era. Two robed figures leaned in towards the clock face, one on either side of it. The clock itself was plain and white, with simple numerals and slim, dark hands. Passengers used it mainly to know whether they were late for dinner. Stewards glanced up at it as they carried trays past on the landing. It is odd to think of a clock made so beautiful for so ordinary a purpose. But nearly everything on her was made that way, down to the smallest thing. Carved wood, soft light, and a pair of quiet figures keeping time. She had a darkroom on board for developing photographs. Cameras were still a serious hobby then, heavy things of leather and brass. Passengers who brought one had nowhere at all to work up their plates at sea, so a small darkroom was fitted out for them near the other quiet rooms. Inside there was a red lamp, a bench, and shallow trays for the chemicals. Fresh water was piped in for washing the finished plates. A steward could help with the work, or a passenger could shut the door and do it alone. Pictures of the ship, taken aboard the ship and finished aboard her as well. Some of the photographs made in those weeks still sit in albums to this day. That is a gentle thing to think about, a room built purely for keeping memories. A small red light glowing quietly somewhere down among the cabins. She carried a library for her second-class passengers. It was a proper room, panelled in sycamore, with long windows and a green carpet. Bookcases lined one wall behind glass doors kept in order by a library steward. Passengers could borrow novels, travel books, and volumes of poetry for the crossing. There were writing tables with headed paper and comfortable chairs by the windows. Passengers wrote letters there to post at the far end of the crossing. Children were welcome there in the mornings when the room was at its quietest. Second class on this ship was famously good, better than first class on many others. That library was the proof of it, a room built for nothing but sitting and reading, rain on the glass, a book open on your knee, and nowhere you need to be. Few things are more restful than a warm room full of books at sea. She had a barber shop, and it sold souvenirs as well as haircuts. There were two of them aboard, in fact, one for first class and one for second. The chairs were fixed firmly to the floor, the way barber chairs are on a ship. Around the walls hung the stock, which had very little to do with shaving. There were pennants, postcards, china dolls, ribbons, and small toys for the children. Passengers bought them to take home or to send on from the next port. The barbers made a good trade in it, on top of their ordinary wages. If you have ever bought something small on a journey just to remember it, you know the feeling. It is one of the oldest habits that travelers have. A little shop of ribbons and dolls swaying gently with the sea. She had electric lifts to carry passengers between her decks. On a ship, this was still something of a novelty, and she was given 4 of them, 3 for first class and 1 for second. Each was a small panelled room with a folding gate and an attendant in uniform who stood there all day and drew the gate across by hand. They were not fast. They rose gently through the decks with a soft, mechanical hum, and passengers used them as much for the pleasure of it as for the climb saved. Children in particular were said to ride them, simply to ride them, up and down through the middle of the ship. There is something lovely in that picture. A small, warm room travelling slowly upward through the heart of a vessel that was itself travelling slowly across the sea. She carried a hospital and an operating room. For a vessel meant to be a floating town, this was simply practical, and she was fitted out accordingly. There was a ward with beds, a separate room for infectious cases, a dispensary, and an operating theatre, all under the care of 2 surgeons who sailed as members of her crew. On an ordinary crossing, their work was ordinary too. Seasickness, a sprained wrist, a galley burn, a child with a fever, a stoker with a cut hand. They kept surgery hours each morning, much as a doctor ashore would. It is a homely detail among all the marble and the glass, and a reassuring one. Whatever else she was also a place where somebody was looking after you if the crossing did not agree with you. Her first-class rooms were each of them decorated differently. On most ships, a cabin was simply a cabin, and they all matched one another. Here the designers chose a different period style for room after room after room. There was Georgian panelling in one, Italian Renaissance in the next, Old Dutch further along the corridor. Some had heavy carved beds, and some had light painted furniture and pale, quiet walls. Wallpapers, curtains and carpets were all chosen to suit each separate scheme. The idea was that a passenger should feel they had arrived somewhere, not merely boarded something. You were meant to walk into your room and forget about the sea entirely. It was a hotel that happened to be moving, and it never let you forget the hotel. Corridor after corridor of quiet rooms, each a little different, inside the floating city. The most expensive rooms on board had their own private promenade. There were 2 such suites, one on each side of the ship, near the middle of her. Each had a sitting room, 2 bedrooms, 2 wardrobe rooms, and a private bathroom, and each one opened out onto a stretch of covered deck some 50 feet long. That deck was yours alone, with wicker chairs and painted half-timbering on the walls. You could step out in your dressing gown in the morning and see nobody at all. The fare for such a suite in high season ran to several £100s. That was more than many people aboard her would earn in a decade of work. But privacy at sea has always been the most expensive thing there is. A quiet stretch of deck, your own doorway, and the water going by below. Some of her rooms had real coal fireplaces in them. It seems a strange thing to put aboard a ship, and yet there they were. A few of the grandest first-class rooms had working grates set into marble surrounds. There were coal fires in some of the public rooms too, in the lounge and the smoking room. A steward would lay and light them, and clear the ash away again each morning. The chimneys were carried up through the decks and vented out somewhere above. The coal for them was carried up quietly in small brass scuttles. Electric heaters warmed most of the other cabins, which was thoroughly modern for the time. But a real fire was the thing people wanted, because a fire feels like home. Firelight moving on panelled walls out in the middle of the Atlantic. That is a very old comfort, carried somewhere very new. Her first-class dining saloon could seat more than 500 people at once. It stretched the full width of the ship and ran over 100 feet long. That made it the largest room afloat anywhere at the time, and it felt like it. The walls were painted white in the Jacobean style, with carved panels and leaded windows. Those windows had no sea behind them, only lamps, since the room sat deep inside her. The floor was laid in a soft, tiled pattern, and the chairs were oak with green leather. There were tables for 2, tables for 4, and long tables for larger parties. Everyone in first class could eat at a single sitting, which few ships could manage. The sound of 500 people at dinner, softened by carpet and carved wood. A great, bright room humming quietly far below the night sky. There was a separate restaurant on board that you had to pay extra to enter. It sat on one of the upper decks, and it was not run by the shipping line at all. A restaurateur held the concession, and he brought his own staff aboard with him. The room was panelled in French walnut with gilded mouldings in the manner of Louis Seize. Silk curtains hung at the windows, and small tables carried rose-coloured lamps. You chose your own hour there, rather than sitting down at a fixed time with everybody else. Passengers who ate there could even claim a small refund on the price of their fare. It was a restaurant that happened to be at sea, and it behaved exactly like one. Soft lamplight on walnut, and the faint sound of a band somewhere down the corridor. That restaurant had its own kitchen and its own staff quite apart from the ship. Nearly 70 people came aboard to run it, cooks and waiters and kitchen boys. Most of them were young men from Italy and France brought over for the work. They had their own galley, their own stores and their own way of doing everything. Their supplies were ordered separately and kept in their own cool rooms below. The manager had run famous rooms in London before he ever took the post. His people wore their own uniforms and answered to him, not to the ship's officers. In effect, there were 2 kitchens aboard working side by side in different languages. The smells that came up that corridor in the evening must have been remarkable. Copper pans, quick voices, and the warm air of a kitchen far from land. First-class passengers dressed for dinner every single night of the voyage. It was not optional, and nobody aboard thought of it as any kind of chore. Men wore white tie and tails with starched collars and carefully polished shoes. Women wore long gowns and changed their jewelry to suit the hour of the evening. Some passengers brought a dozen trunks aboard for a voyage of barely 1 week. There were separate outfits for morning, for walking, for tea, and for dinner. Trunks were stored below and brought up to the cabins as they were needed. Ladies' maids and valets travelled along to see that all of it happened smoothly. At about 7 in the evening, a bugler walked the corridors playing a call to dinner. That was the signal, and the whole ship quietly changed its clothes. Doors opening along a corridor and soft footsteps moving towards the light. A band played while the passengers ate their dinner. There were 8 musicians aboard, and they worked in 2 separate groups. A trio played in the restaurant, and a quintet played in the reception rooms and saloons. Between them, they covered tea time, dinner, and the long, comfortable hours afterwards. They were expected to know hundreds of pieces by heart, with no music in front of them. Passengers would send requests up, and the band would play them without any fuss. Waltzes, light opera, popular songs of the day, and gentler pieces for the evening. The men had been gathered from orchestras and bands all around Britain. Several had played together on other ships before this one. They travelled as second-class passengers and worked for a music agency, not the line. Music drifting up a staircase while people finish their coffee below. Few sounds are gentler than that, heard faintly from another room. The reception room had a grand piano standing in it. That room sat just outside the first-class dining saloon at the foot of the staircase. Passengers gathered there before dinner and stayed on there afterwards with their coffee. The walls were white-panelled, the carpet was deep, and wicker chairs stood about in groups. At one side, on a slightly raised floor, sat the piano and the players' chairs. There was a large tapestry on one wall showing a scene of a royal hunting party. Palms in brass pots stood in the corners of the room. People came down the stairs into this room, which was rather the point of the stairs. It was the warmest and most sociable place aboard in the hour before dinner. Voices, cups, and a piano playing gently underneath it all. The sound of people at ease with nowhere else they need to be. There was a veranda cafe on board with real ivy growing on the walls. 2 of them, in fact, one on each side of the ship, towards the stern. They had tall, arched windows looking out over the wake and black and white tiled floors. Wicker chairs and small round tables stood about as though set out in a garden. Trellis work covered the walls, and real ivy was trained across it in green ribbons. Palms stood in pots between the tables, and daylight came in from 3 sides. This was where you took your morning coffee, or sat with a book after lunch. It was the least formal room in first class, and often the best loved of them all. A garden room moving quietly across the ocean at 20 knots. Green leaves against white trellis, and the water unrolling behind. Passengers could send a telegram from the middle of the ocean. Up behind the officers' quarters was a small room full of humming equipment. 2 young operators worked there in shifts, sending and receiving messages by wireless. Those messages went out in code, were caught by shore stations, and passed on as telegrams. A passenger could write a note at a desk and have it reach London by morning. Most of the traffic was ordinary and rather charming. Greetings, business, and dinner arrangements. The operators worked long hours, tapping steadily away through the quiet of the evening. The service cost around 12 shillings and sixpence for the first 10 words. There had been no such thing at all only a generation earlier. Now a voice of sorts could leave a ship at sea and arrive on dry land. Invisible words going out over dark water from the floating city. She was a Royal Mail ship, and she carried her own post office. The letters in her name stood for that duty, and she took it seriously. Deep in her forward section were mail rooms and a sorting office staffed by 5 seapost clerks, 2 British and 3 American, who worked the crossing the way they would have worked a shift on land. Around 3,000 sacks of mail travelled with her, many thousands of letters, sorted, while the ocean went past outside. It meant that somewhere below the dining rooms and the music, an ordinary working day was quietly going on. Men bending over pigeonholes, sorting other people's news, carrying birthday wishes and business and love letters across the water so that a message written in one country could be read in another. Her kitchens took on about 40,000 fresh eggs before she sailed. It is a number that sounds like an error until you think about the week ahead. She would carry more than 2,000 people across the ocean, and every one of them expected breakfast. So the eggs came aboard in crates, packed in straw, hand-counted, and stowed in the cool rooms below. Beside them went thousands of pounds of butter, sacks of flour, and fresh cream in sealed cans. Nothing could be bought at sea. Whatever the kitchens might need for the crossing had to be standing in the storerooms before the last rope came off the quay. Imagine those crates in the half-light of the hold, stacked in quiet rows, waiting. A whole week of ordinary mornings resting in the dark, ready to become breakfast. She carried tons of fresh meat, fish, and poultry laid in long before she left the dock. The figures read less like a ship's list and more like the order book of a small town. Something near 75,000 pounds of fresh meat went aboard, with 11,000 pounds of fresh fish beside it, and 25,000 pounds of poultry and game. There were cold rooms for each, held at their own temperatures so that beef and fish and grouse never shared the same air. Refrigerating machinery hummed away below decks, keeping it all sweet and still. Butchers and fishmongers worked in the chill in white aprons, moving without hurry. It is a strange and pleasant thought. Somewhere under the passengers' feet, in rooms colder than a winter night, the whole voyage was already waiting, quiet and unhurried. She loaded thousands of bottles of wine and beer into her cellars before sailing. The drink was stowed as carefully as the china, each bottle in its own cradle so the sea could not rattle it. Roughly 20,000 bottles of beer and stout went below, along with about 1,500 bottles of wine and several hundred more of spirits. There were cases of champagne for the restaurant and simple table wine for the second-class saloon. Mineral water and ginger ale came aboard by the thousand as well. A separate cellar held it all, cool and dim, with a steward who kept the keys. He worked from a written list, walking the racks in the near dark. Picture that room on the first night out, rows of glass in shadow, faintly chiming as the ship breathed, holding 100 small celebrations that had not happened yet. Her galleys ran almost around the clock, from long before dawn until late at night. If you had opened the door of the main kitchen at any hour, you would have found someone working. The first bakers began around 5 in the morning, and the last washing up finished near midnight. In between came breakfast, luncheon, tea, dinner, and the endless small orders sent up to the cabins. More than 60 cooks worked in the first-class kitchens alone, each with his own narrow trade. There were soup cooks, sauce cooks, roast cooks, and a man who did nothing but ice. Others worked only on vegetables or on sauces for fish and nothing else. Steam rose against the white tiles hour after hour. Below the music and the conversation, this warm and orderly room simply kept going, the way a heart does, without ever asking to be noticed. There was a bakery on board, and it made fresh bread every single morning at sea. The bakers kept the strangest hours on the ship. They began while the passengers were still asleep, mixing and proving in the small hours so that the loaves came out warm in time for breakfast. Their ovens turned out rolls and cottage loaves, dinner bread for 3 separate dining rooms, and pastry for the restaurant above. Flour came aboard in sacks by the ton. A confectioner worked nearby on cakes and sweets, and the smell of both must have drifted along the working alleyways. There is something deeply steadying in that. In the middle of the North Atlantic, in the smallest hours of the morning, in a room of warm ovens and quiet hands, someone was making bread for people who did not yet know they were hungry. She had a small room kept cold just for flowers. It belongs near the top of the list of unnecessary and lovely things about her. Fresh flowers came aboard by the crate for the dining saloons, the reception rooms, and the private suites, and flowers wilt quickly in a warm ship. So, a refrigerated compartment was set aside for them alone, held cool and dim beside the rooms for meat, fish, and cheese. Daffodils and carnations in the spring, roses for the tables at dinner. Each morning a steward took up what was needed and carried the rest back into the chill. Even now, as you rest, it is a pleasant thing to hold in mind, somewhere beneath the sea air and the engine hum, a cold, quiet room full of flowers, sleeping in the dark, waiting to be brought up into the light. Third-class passengers on board were fed better than many of them ate at home. That is not a small thing, and it was quite deliberate. On many ships of the day, steerage passengers were expected to bring their own food for the crossing. Here they were served 3 or 4 proper meals a day in their own dining saloon, sitting at long tables laid with white cloths. Breakfast might be oatmeal, smoked herring, bread, and marmalade. Dinner brought soup, roast beef, potatoes, and a sweet pudding. Tea in the evening was bread and butter with stewed fruit. There was cheese as well, and fresh fruit, and tea whenever anyone wanted it. For families who had spent years counting every meal, the sheer regularity of it must have felt like a kind of luxury. Plates arriving, unasked, at the same hour every day. Warmth, and enough, and nothing to worry about until morning. Meals were served to a strict daily timetable, and the whole ship moved to it. The rhythm was set by a bugle. A steward walked the corridors playing a short call, and behind that sound, the ship quietly rearranged itself. Breakfast ran through the middle of the morning. Luncheon came near 1, afternoon tea arrived around 4, dinner at 7, and supper for those still awake much later. Each class had its own sittings and its own room, so the kitchens fed the ship in waves rather than all at once. Nobody had to wonder what came next. That may be the quietest luxury of an ocean crossing. There were no decisions to make, no errands to run, nowhere else to be. Only the same gentle call at the same hour telling you that everything was going exactly as it should. She carried tens of thousands of pieces of crockery, and every one was counted aboard by hand. You could furnish a small town's worth of tables from her storerooms. There were something like 57,000 pieces of crockery, near 29,000 pieces of glassware, and more than 40,000 knives, forks, and spoons. Plates were stacked in fitted racks so they could not shift with the swell. Glasses stood in padded frames. There were finger bowls, soup tureens, egg cups, and crystal decanters among them. Each class had its own pattern, from the gilt-edged china of the first-class saloon to the plain white ware carried in third. Stewards polished, counted, and put it all back after every meal. It is an oddly soothing picture, shelf after shelf of white porcelain in the dark, sitting perfectly still, while the whole ocean moved past outside. Even the ice cream was made on board, from the ship's own cream and her own ice. There was no other way to have it. Nothing could be bought mid-ocean, so anything the passengers might want had to be made in the kitchens or carried in the cold rooms. Refrigerating machinery below decks made the ice, the confectioners made the mixtures, and the results came up to the tables in silver dishes. There were creams and ices for the first-class dinners, jellies and moulded puddings, and simple sweets for the children in second class. Ices arrived at the table in tall glasses with a thin wafer alongside. All of it produced in a few warm rooms, deep inside a moving ship, hundreds of miles from any shop. That was the quiet marvel of her. Everything a town needs to feed itself, folded neatly into the hull of the floating city. She carried tens of thousands of pieces of linen and her own laundry to keep them. The numbers involved in simply keeping a floating town in clean sheets are quietly astonishing. Something like 45,000 table napkins traveled with her, along with thousands of bed sheets, pillowcases, tablecloths, bath towels, and aprons, all counted, stacked, and stored before she sailed. Stewards changed and remade the beds each day. Tablecloths were laid fresh for every sitting in the dining saloons. Somewhere below, in warm rooms nobody visiting would ever see, that endless, soft weight of cloth was washed and pressed and folded and carried back up again. All that quiet labor existed so that a passenger could turn back a corner of a bed at night and find it cool and white and smelling faintly of nothing at all. She carried more crew than she carried first-class passengers. It is one of those facts that quietly rearranges the picture in your head. When she sailed, there were roughly 900 crew aboard and only about 320 people in first class, which means that for every passenger dressing for dinner, there were nearly 3 people making that dinner possible: stewards, cooks, stokers, engineers, lift attendants, bakers, postal clerks, and a gymnasium instructor. There were window cleaners as well, and a printer for the daily paper. They lived in their own quarters, ate at their own hours, and moved through their own corridors, so that guests rarely saw the machinery of their own comfort. She was really 2 ships at once, laid one over the other, one where people rested, and one just behind the paneling where people worked so that resting was possible. Most of her crew were not sailors at all. That sounds strange for a ship, until you look at what she actually was. Only a few dozen men were deck crew in the old sense, the ones who handled ropes, stood watch, and steered. The rest belonged to two other worlds. Down below were the engineers, firemen, and greasers who kept her moving. Everywhere else were the victualling crew, the stewards and stewardesses, cooks, waiters, pantry hands, and stores keepers, who together formed the largest department on board. She needed hotel keepers far more than she needed seamen. More than half of her crew worked in that way, out of sight of the sea. In truth, she was a grand hotel that happened to be crossing an ocean, staffed by people who spent their working lives making beds, carrying trays, and turning down lamps for strangers who would never learn their names. Her stewards worked some of the longest hours on board. Theirs was the job that never quite finished. A first-class bedroom steward might look after a handful of cabins and be on call from before breakfast until the last passenger went to bed. In between came trays, laundry, baths drawn, shoes cleaned, beds turned down, and messages carried the length of the ship. Stewardesses did the same for the ladies traveling alone and for families with young children. They knew every passenger by name and every corridor by heart, and many had crossed the Atlantic dozens of times before. They slept in narrow berths near the working alleyways. Their days often began before 6 and ended long after the last bell, and they carried something that never appears on any manifest, which is the ordinary kindness that makes a stranger feel at home in a moving room. The men who shoveled her coal were known as the Black Gang. The name came from the coal dust, which settled on everything and everyone below. They worked in watches around the clock, deep in the boiler rooms, in a heat that climbed well past anything comfortable. Firemen fed the furnaces. Trimmers wheeled coal from the bunkers in barrows to keep the fires supplied and the ship in balance. Greasers moved among the engines with long, spouted oil cans. The work was done by shovel in shifts, with water carried down to them by the bucket. If you had walked those rooms, you would have found more than 200 men keeping her alive hour after hour, seeing nothing at all of the sea. Above them, passengers strolled the boat deck in the spring sunshine, with no idea whose steady, patient work was carrying them forward. Her captain was the most senior officer in the whole shipping line. Edward John Smith had spent about 40 years at sea by then, and most of them with the same company. He was Commodore of the fleet, the man given the newest ship on her first crossing, because that was the honor the position carried. Passengers liked him. He had a white beard, an easy manner, and a reputation for making people feel that nothing needed worrying about. Some travelers booked passage simply because he was in command. The newspapers of the day called him the millionaire's captain, and the name stuck. On that voyage, he moved through the public rooms in the evenings, stopping at tables, taking dinner with passengers who had asked for the pleasure. A quiet, courteous presence in a warm room, moving without hurry, the way senior men do when they have nothing left to prove. It is said that this was to have been his last voyage before retirement. The story was reported in the newspapers at the time, though the details have been argued over ever since. One account has him planning to step down as soon as the crossing was done. Another suggests he may have stayed on a while longer to see the next new ship into service before leaving the sea for good. What is not in doubt is that he was near the end of a very long career. He had a house in Southampton, a wife and a daughter, and a garden he was fond of. Whatever the exact plan, there is something gentle in the picture of an old sailor on a last long crossing, standing out on the bridge wing in the evening air, thinking of a quiet garden waiting at home. Two lookouts watched the sea from a bucket high up her foremast. The crow's nest, they called it, and it was reached by a ladder set inside the mast itself. It sat far above the forward deck, a small steel tub with room for 2 men, a telephone down to the bridge, and a bell. Lookouts stood short watches and were then relieved because the cold and the wind wore a man down quickly. Their whole task was simply to look. No charts, no instruments, nothing to read or reckon, just the horizon and the patience to keep watching it. 2 men side by side saying very little, letting their eyes do the work. There are worse ways to spend an evening than that, high in the dark, wrapped against the wind, with the whole quiet ocean laid out before you, and nothing asked of you but your attention. Her designer sailed with her so that he could watch how she behaved at sea. Thomas Andrews was a shipbuilder from Belfast, and he had overseen her design from the drawing office onward. He travelled as part of a small guarantee group, a handful of Harland and Wolff men whose job was to note anything that might be improved. He walked the ship constantly, filling a notebook. The writing room was larger than it really needed to be. The pebble dashing on one wall of the promenade was too dark. There were too many screws in the stateroom hat hooks. It is a lovely kind of care, that level of attention to small things. A man wandering his own creation with a pencil, noticing details nobody else would ever see, wanting her to be just a little better than she already was. She carried passengers from dozens of different countries on that one crossing. If you had stood near the third-class stairways, you would have heard a dozen languages at once. There were Irish and English travellers, Swedes and Finns, Norwegians and Danes, Lebanese families, Bulgarians, Croatians, Italians, and Chinese seamen travelling for work. Notices were posted in several languages. Interpreters moved among the lower decks helping with questions and paperwork. Whole villages had sometimes booked together, so friends found friends aboard. The ship briefly held a slice of half the world, gathered into a few hundred feet of steel. In the evenings there was music in the third-class general room, brought aboard in cases and coat pockets. Bagpipes, fiddles, a squeeze box, and singing in tunes that had never crossed an ocean before. Different words, the same warmth, all of it drifting up the stairwells into the sea air. Many in third class were travelling to begin an entirely new life. They were not tourists. For most of them, this was a one-way crossing, paid for out of savings, or with money sent home by a relative who had gone on ahead. There were farmers, servants, miners, seamstresses, and whole families with children. Some carried everything they owned in a single trunk. They came for work, for land, for a brother in Chicago or a cousin in Minnesota, and the ship was simply the bridge between one life and the next. Their quarters were plain but new, with clean bunks, electric light, and hot water, better than much of what they had left behind. And for a few days, before whatever came next, they had nothing to do but eat, sleep, and be carried by the floating city. Her third class was better than many ships offered in second. This was unusual, and it was deliberate. Where other vessels still carried their poorest passengers in open dormitories, she gave hers in closed cabins with bunks, mattresses, and washstands, most sleeping 2 to 6. There was a general room with a piano, a smoking room, and a dining saloon with proper tables and white cloths. There was even a small open deck space kept for them. For a great many of those travelling, this was more comfort and more privacy than they had known at home. Whole families crossed that way, sitting down together to meals somebody else had cooked. Below the chandeliers and the carved staircases, there were rooms full of ordinary people being treated rather well and enjoying it. She began her journey from an English port on a spring afternoon. The date was the 10th of April 1912, and she left Southampton around noon under a mild grey sky. Tenders had been coming and going all morning. Boat trains had arrived from London bringing passengers straight to the quayside. Mail vans had unloaded their sacks of letters, and the last of the provisions had gone aboard. Crowds gathered along the dock to watch, as they did for any new ship. Small boys sat along the railings to get the best view of her. At the appointed hour, her whistles sounded, the ropes came off, and the tugs eased her out into the water. There was nothing dramatic about it, just a very large and beautiful thing moving slowly away from a wall on an ordinary afternoon, with people waving handkerchiefs that grew smaller and smaller. She passed her sea trials in a single day. Before any ship is handed over, she must prove herself, and hers were done off the Irish coast on a bright spring morning. She ran at various speeds, held a straight course, and turned in wide circles while men with stopwatches wrote down what she did. She was stopped from full speed to standing to see how much water it took. She sailed out and back to test her compasses. By that evening, the paperwork was signed, and she was formally accepted, and she set off overnight for England to be loaded. It had all gone smoothly, which is what trials are for. She had spent years being built, and in one long day of turning circles on a calm sea, she became a working ship. Her wash nearly pulled another ship into her side as she left the harbour. It happened within minutes of her departure. As she moved down the channel, the sheer volume of water she displaced dragged at the vessels moored alongside. The liner, New York, tied up at her berth, surged in the current until her mooring ropes parted, and her stern swung out toward the passing hull. There were only a few feet between them. Quick work by a tug and a touch astern from the engines swung the danger away, and both ships settled again. The crowd on the dock went very quiet and then went back to waving. She carried on out to sea about an hour later than planned. A small piece of drama at the start, and then the harbour behind her and open water ahead. She stopped in France on her very first evening at sea. The crossing to Cherbourg took only a few hours, and she arrived after dark. The harbour there had no berth large enough to take her, so she anchored offshore, lit from end to end, while two tenders ran back and forth, carrying people out to her. They brought about 150 travellers aboard, many of them wealthy Americans returning home after a European winter. A few dozen passengers left the ship here for France. Among those coming aboard were families with trunks of clothes for the season. Baggage and mail crossed in the same small boats. Within a couple of hours she had weighed anchor again and was gone. Picture her from the shore that night, a long line of golden windows on black water, quietly turning and slipping away west into the dark. She anchored off the Irish coast the following day. Queenstown was her last stop, a small harbour on the southern edge of Ireland known today as Cove. She arrived late in the morning and stood offshore again, being far too large for the quay. Tenders carried out well over 100 more passengers, most of them Irish emigrants travelling in third class, along with more than 1,000 sacks of mail. Local traders came aboard too, selling lace and linen on the promenade deck to anyone who wanted a souvenir. A few passengers went ashore. Postcards written on board went with them, to be posted home. In the early afternoon she raised anchor and turned west. If you had stood on the headland that day, you would have watched her grow small against the grey sea, with the whole Atlantic opening quietly in front of her. A photographer left her at that last Irish stop, and his pictures survived. His name was Francis Brown, a young Irish student priest, and he had been given a ticket from England to Queenstown as a gift from his uncle. He carried a camera with him and used it constantly. He photographed the gymnasium, the boat deck, passengers dozing in deck chairs, a small boy spinning atop, the captain looking down from the bridge. An American couple offered to pay his fare for the rest of the voyage. He wrote to ask permission from his superior and received a short reply telling him to get off the ship. So he did, and stepped ashore with the rolls of film in his pocket. Because of that small refusal, we can still look at those days exactly as he found them. Her passengers could walk for miles without ever leaving the ship. That was one of the quiet pleasures of a crossing. She had promenade decks running most of her length, some open to the wind, some glassed in against the weather, arranged on several levels. A steady walker doing laps of the boat deck could cover a few miles in an afternoon and repeat nothing but the view. Deck chairs lined the sheltered sides, holding passengers reading under rugs, with stewards bringing round beef tea in the late morning. Children played shuffleboard and quoits on the open stretches. Others simply leaned on the rail and watched the miles go quietly by. There was no destination to any of it, which was rather the point. Just the rail, the water going past, the long, clean line of the deck ahead, and nowhere else in the world you had to be. Dogs travelled with the passengers, and they had kennels of their very own. There was something like a dozen aboard on that crossing, most of them belonging to first-class families. One or two tiny ones were quietly kept in cabins, but officially the dogs lived in proper kennels on an upper deck, looked after by a carpenter who fed and exercised them. They were walked each day along a stretch of deck set aside for the purpose. There was even talk of a dog show planned for later in the week, which the owners had been arranging with great seriousness. Picture that for a moment. Champion Pekingese French bulldogs and an Airedale trotting along the boards in the sea air, entirely unimpressed by the largest ship in the world, interested only in the next smell and the next kind hand. She carried her own newspaper printed fresh each day at sea. It was called the Atlantic Daily Bulletin, and it appeared every morning on the great liners of the line. The news came in overnight by wireless, tapped down from shore stations while the passengers slept, then set in type and printed on board. Alongside the headlines ran stock prices, racing results, advertisements, society gossip, and the day's menus. Passenger lists were printed too, so travellers could see who else was aboard. Passengers read it over breakfast as though they were sitting at home in an armchair, hundreds of miles from any coast. There is something charming in the sheer effort of it. The world had agreed that even in the middle of the ocean, a person ought to be able to unfold a newspaper with their coffee and find out, gently, what everyone else had been up to. Sunday morning brought a service in the first-class dining saloon. The captain read it himself from the company's own prayer book, standing at a table set at the head of the room. Passengers from first and second class came together for it, and the ship's musicians played the hymns. It began in the middle of the morning and lasted perhaps 3/4 of an hour. Afterwards, people drifted back out to the decks, and the ordinary business of the day resumed. Coffee was served, deck chairs were claimed, and the morning went gently on. Other services were held elsewhere aboard, in other languages and other faiths, for those who wanted them. It was a bright Sunday, clear and cold and very still. Voices singing together in a warm panelled room, sunlight moving on the water outside, and a ship going west at an easy, untroubled pace. The sea that week was unusually, beautifully calm. Sailors who crossed the Atlantic for a living remarked on it. April can be a rough month out there, all long swells and grey water, but that week the ocean lay almost perfectly flat. Passengers who had expected to feel unwell simply never did. The horizon stayed level, the decks stayed steady, and cups sat exactly where they were put. Those aboard described the surface as being like a mirror or like a sheet of polished glass, holding the light of the sky without a single wrinkle in it. Even now, as you rest, you can let that picture settle over you. A flat, silver ocean going on and on in every direction, a mild spring sky above it, and moving quietly through the middle of all that stillness, the floating city. Icebergs are born from glaciers long before they ever reach the sea. Every iceberg begins as snow falling on a high and quiet place. That snow settles, and more falls on top of it, and the weight presses the layers into ice. Over centuries, the ice creeps downhill, a river moving slower than the hand of a clock. When it finally reaches the coast, pieces break away and float free. The ice that drifts through the North Atlantic in spring is often thousands of years old. It fell as snow long before any ship was built, long before anyone thought to cross an ocean. It has simply been traveling ever since, patient and unhurried. There is something restful in that. The ice keeps its own time, the same time it has always kept, drifting south through dark water, without hurry and without any need to arrive. Most of an iceberg lies hidden below the surface. What you can see above the water is only a small part of the whole. Ice floats because it is a little lighter than seawater, but only a little. So roughly 1 part in 10 rides above the waves, and all the rest hangs quietly beneath. A berg the size of a house on top may be the size of a cathedral below. Underwater the shapes are strange and smooth, carved by currents into shelves and arches and long, pale ridges. Divers who have seen them describe blue light and deep silence. The hidden part is not a threat in itself. It is simply the greater share of something patient, resting out of sight. Like so much in the ocean, an iceberg keeps most of itself quiet and below, where the water is still and the light turns soft and blue. That spring saw unusually many icebergs drift south. Some years the North Atlantic is nearly clear of them. That year it was not. A mild winter in the far north and a run of currents pushing the right way sent more ice than usual down along the shipping lanes. Bergs that would normally have melted much further north survived the journey and kept going into warmer latitudes. Sailors that season wrote of fields of ice where they had seen open water in other years. Ships slowed, altered course, and sent word to one another. None of it was strange to them. Ice moves with the ocean, and the ocean changes its mind from year to year. It was simply a heavier season than most, a slow white procession drifting south through cold and quiet water, the way it has drifted every spring for longer than anyone can measure. A calm sea makes ice much harder to see at night. This sounds backwards until you think about how ice is actually spotted. Lookouts do not usually see the berg itself in the dark. They see the white line of water breaking at its base, a faint ring of foam that gives away its edge. Waves make that ring. A flat sea does not. On a night with no swell at all, ice can sit in the water without a single ripple around it, showing only a shape, slightly paler or slightly darker than the horizon. The stillness that makes an ocean beautiful is the same stillness that makes it quiet. That week the sea was glassy, the kind of mirror surface passengers remembered for the rest of their lives, lying flat and calm and unbroken all the way to the edge of the sky. There was no moon at all that night. The moon had already set, and the sky above the North Atlantic was left entirely to the stars. Survivors remembered that sky for the rest of their lives. With no moonlight and no cloud, the stars came down to the water in every direction, so bright and so many that the horizon seemed to disappear. Several people said afterwards that they had never seen anything like it, that the sky felt closer than it had any right to be. Without a moon, the sea gives back no silver, and the darkness is complete and very soft. It was, by every account, a beautiful night to be at sea. Cold, still, and lit only from above, with the whole quiet arch of the stars turning slowly overhead as the ship moved west beneath them. The North Atlantic in April is barely above freezing. The water that far north holds its cold long after the calendar has said spring. In the middle of the ocean, well away from any land, the surface sits close to the point where salt water begins to turn to ice. Sailors have always known this. They know that the sea keeps winter longer than the shore does, that a bright afternoon on deck can sit above water that is nearly frozen. That is why the boat deck was cold that week even in sunshine, why passengers walked in coats and gloves, why the crew wore layers below. The ocean simply takes its time. It warms slowly and it cools slowly, holding on to whatever season it was given months before. A great steady body of water that is never in a hurry to change. Ships warned each other about ice by wireless. It was still a new thing then, this business of speaking across open water without a cable. Yet, by that spring, it had already become ordinary. When a ship met ice, its operator would tap out a short message giving the position, and other ships would pass the word along. Several such messages crossed the Atlantic that week, ship to ship, hand to hand, like neighbors calling over a garden fence. The notes were often brief and informal, folded in among passenger telegrams and business traffic. It was a young system, still learning its manners, but it was genuinely new and genuinely kind. For the first time in the long history of the sea, a ship in the middle of the ocean was no longer entirely alone. It could speak, and it could be answered. The wireless operators were employed by a telegraph company, not by the ship. This is a small detail with rather large consequences. In those years, the wireless sets on most liners belonged to an outside firm, and the men who worked them were that firm's staff. Their first duty was the paying traffic, passengers' greetings, market prices, birthday wishes, messages to be relayed ashore. Navigation warnings were passed along willingly, but they were not the job as the company had defined it. The two young men on board worked long shifts in a small cabin, clearing a backlog of hundreds of messages. Within a few years, that arrangement changed everywhere. Wireless became the ship's own equipment, staffed around the clock, with safety traffic first and everything else second. The lesson was learned quickly, and it was kept, and it has been the rule at sea ever since. Wireless messages traveled further at night. Radio waves behave differently after dark. During the day, sunlight stirs the upper air and absorbs much of the long wave signal those early sets used. When the sun goes down, that layer settles, and the signal skips off the high atmosphere and comes back down again far away. Operators noticed this early. A set that struggled to reach a few hundred miles in daylight could sometimes speak across 1,000 miles at night. So the small hours were the busy hours in the wireless cabin, with the key tapping in the dark while the passengers slept. It is a quiet and rather pleasing piece of physics. The same darkness that hides the sea from view opens the air above it, and voices that could not carry by day travel further and further while everyone else is asleep. The nearest ships that night were further away than anyone realized. Distance at sea is a strange thing. A light on the horizon can look close enough to walk to and still be many miles off, and positions in those days were worked out by careful arithmetic rather than certainty. Several vessels were somewhere in that region of ocean. A ship might be near enough to see and still be a night's work away. Some had stopped for the night, ringed by ice, with their wireless sets switched off and their operators asleep, which was perfectly normal practice then. Others were steaming hours away across dark and empty water. Nobody was careless. The ocean was simply very large, and the tools for measuring it were very young. And out on that flat and starlit water, moving quietly west through the cold with every window lit, was the floating city. The lookout who first saw the ice is said to have had no binoculars. The story is told often, and it may well be true, though the details have been gently argued over for a very long time. What seems clear is that the pair of glasses normally kept in the crow's nest was not there for the crossing after a late change of officers before sailing. Whether they would have helped is another question entirely. Binoculars narrow your view. On a dark night, most experienced lookouts trusted their own eyes first and used glasses only to confirm what they had already seen. The men in the nest that night watched the water carefully, and the one who saw it called it down at once, steadily, without a moment of hesitation. He did exactly what he was there to do, and he did it well. She was turned away from the ice, but not quite in time. The order went down within seconds of the call. The wheel went over, the engine room answered, and the great hull began to swing. She did respond. For a ship of that length, turning is not a quick thing. It is more like a long, slow lean. Thousands of tons changing their mind together. Witnesses said her bow came round noticeably before the ice arrived. She was already turning when it came. Had there been a little more water between them, she would have passed it by, and the night would have been remembered only for its stars. That is the shape of it. Not a failure of seamanship, but a matter of seconds and yards, decided out on a dark sea by men doing their level best in the time they were given. The damage was not one great tear, but a line of small openings. For most of a century, people pictured a long gash cut down her side. When the wreck was surveyed with sound, that picture changed. What the survey suggested was a series of narrow separations in the plating spread along a stretch of the hull, several of them no wider than a hand. The total open area was surprisingly small. It was the length of it that mattered, because it reached across more than one compartment. There is also a long-running theory about the quality of some of her rivets and how they behaved in very cold water, and it remains a theory discussed carefully by engineers who were never there. The scale of it was small, the length of it was everything, and people are still learning from her gently a century on. She was built to float with several of her compartments flooded. Her hull was divided across its length by watertight bulkheads, walls that rose from the bottom of the ship, with doors that could be closed from the bridge in seconds. The design was sound and, for its day, advanced. She could take water into any 2 compartments and stay level. She could take the first 4 and still float. Ships of that era were expected to meet trouble at their ends, in a collision head-on or a strike from the side, and against that she was very well made indeed. Naval architects still admire the arrangement. They study her drawings even now. It was careful, thoughtful engineering by men who had thought hard about the sea, and it kept her steady and upright for far longer than a lesser ship would have managed. More compartments filled than she had been designed to survive. This is the quiet center of the whole story, and it is really a matter of arithmetic. Any 2 and she floats. The first 4 and she floats. The line of openings reached a little further than that. The bulkheads did their work, and the pumps did theirs, and for a long while she sat almost level in the water. The engineers below kept the lights burning the whole time. But water finds its way, and once enough weight had gathered forward, she began to settle by the head. There was no violence in it. She went down at the bow by inches, so gently that many on board did not believe anything was wrong at all. And in that slow, quiet interval, the boats were swung out, and the long work of getting people away began. Her designer knew within minutes what the outcome would be. Thomas Andrews had drawn her and had sailed with her, and he walked the flooded spaces early with a plan of the ship in his hand. He counted the compartments, did the arithmetic, and understood. What he did with that knowledge is the part worth remembering. He spent the hours that followed moving through the ship, quietly and without alarm, helping people into their life belts and encouraging them up to the boats. Stewards remembered him calm, coatless, still working. He knocked on doors that had already been knocked on twice. He never raised his voice, and he never told anyone to hurry in a way that would have frightened them. A man who knew the whole of it, choosing to spend what he had on other people, one door and one passenger at a time. The lifeboat she carried met the law of the time. This surprises people, and it is worth saying plainly. She was not sailing outside the rules. She carried more boats than the regulations demanded, 16 wooden boats and 4 collapsible ones, and the paperwork was entirely in order. The board that governed such things had set its requirements by the tonnage of a ship, and by that measure she was well provided for. Her owners had even considered fitting extra sets of davits, the curved arms that swing the boats out, and some of that provision was actually built into her. The intention was there. The men who built her were not indifferent to the sea. The framework around it was simply older than the ships it governed, and that gap, once it had been seen clearly, would not be allowed to stand for very long. The law had been written for much smaller ships. That is really the whole of it. The regulations dated from a time when the largest liners afloat were a fraction of her size, and the table of requirements simply stopped at the top, as though no ship would ever grow past it. Ships grew anyway. The paper simply did not grow with the steel. The thinking of the day was different too. Lifeboats were imagined as ferries, meant to carry people across to a rescuing vessel in a busy shipping lane, not to hold everyone at once. It was a reasonable assumption in its time and a wrong one. Rules tend to be written out of experience, and the experience had not yet happened. Afterwards, it was rewritten quickly and plainly and for good in language that has kept passengers safe at sea ever since. Many of the boats left less than full. In the dark, with the deck still solid underfoot and the lights still burning warmly, it was genuinely hard to believe the ship was in any danger. Some passengers declined to go, preferring a steady lounge to a small boat swinging out over black water. Some officers, unsure how much weight the davits would hold when fully loaded, lowered boats partly filled, intending to bring them alongside a lower door and take on more. Others simply did not know the boat's true capacity. It was confusion, not indifference. Nobody standing on that deck had ever done this before. And still, more than 700 people came away in those boats, wrapped in blankets under all those stars, every one of them carried clear because a crew stayed at the ropes in the cold and kept working. Her band is remembered for playing on. 8 musicians, led by a young violinist, had been engaged to play in the lounges and at dinner. That night they gathered together and played where people could hear them out in the cold while the boats were being loaded. Every survivor account agrees that the music went on for a long time. People in the boats could hear it across the water. What they played last has been argued over ever since, and honestly, nobody knows. Different people remembered different tunes, and memory on such a night is a gentle and unreliable thing. What is certain is the choosing. 8 men who had no duty at all to be there decided that the last useful thing they could offer was something steady to listen to. Music given away in the dark so that nobody had to stand there in silence. Her wireless operators kept sending until the very end. The 2 young men in the wireless cabin had already been working for hours on ordinary passenger traffic. When the word came down from the bridge, they turned the set to distress calls and stayed at the key. They sent the position again and again, correcting it as it changed, reaching out to every ship whose signal they could hear. They were told they could go, and they stayed anyway, sending for as long as the power held. Neither of them had yet reached the age of 30. Because of them, a ship many miles off learned where to come, and turned, and came. Everything that followed, every boat found in the dark, every blanket and every cup of something warm, began with 2 tired young men in a small room, tapping steadily into the night. A ship came through the ice all night to reach the survivors. The Carpathia was a modest liner headed the other way, smaller and slower, with no particular reason to become a hero. Her wireless man happened still to be awake. It was the last thing he did before turning in for the night. When the call reached him, her captain turned her around and drove her back through that same ice field in the dark, posting extra lookouts along the bows and on the wings of the bridge. She ran for something over 3 hours through water she could not properly see. On the way, her crew prepared, blankets warmed, soup and coffee made, cabins given up, ropes and slings rigged to lift people gently aboard. She arrived as the sky was beginning to grey, and everyone she found she carried safely home. That rescue ship's captain lit every fire he had to go faster. Arthur Rostron did an extraordinary thing very quietly. He ordered heat cut off from the cabins and the hot water, and every ounce of steam sent to the engines instead. Stokers were roused from their bunks to feed boilers that were not normally lit at all. She was built for a comfortable 14 knots or so, and that night she somehow found 17. It is not a large difference on paper. Out there in the dark, it was everything. He wrote out his orders in a steady, numbered list, doctor by doctor, ladder by ladder, so that nothing at all would be forgotten in the rush. It still stands as one of the finest pieces of seamanship anyone has written down, done in the dark, on a moment's notice without a single hesitation. The survivors were brought into New York in the rain. The Carpathia came up the harbor on a Thursday evening, 3 days later, through low cloud and a steady drizzle. Thousands of people were waiting along the piers, standing quietly in the wet, and the newspapers of the day remarked on how little noise there was. She stopped first to hand over the empty lifeboats, then came in and made fast, and the people she carried walked down into a city that had already made room for them. Hospitals had cleared beds, doctors had come down to the waterfront to wait, families had travelled in from other states, strangers offered rooms, clothes, train fares and money without being asked. It was a sad arrival, and it was also a kind one. A whole city standing in the rain to receive whoever came down that gangway. The disaster changed the law of the sea within 2 years. The response was swift and it was thorough. Nations met in London and wrote a new convention for the safety of life at sea, and its central rules are still the spine of maritime law today. Lifeboat places for every soul on board. Lifeboat drills held and recorded. Wireless kept manned around the clock, with distress traffic first and everything else second. Shipping lanes moved further south through the ice season. Watertight bulkheads were required to rise higher in the hull. Almost every one of those rules was paid for that night, and has been quietly saving people ever since in storms and groundings and engine room fires that never made the news. It is the most useful kind of memorial. A set of plain instructions that simply keeps working year after year without anyone noticing. An ice patrol still watches that stretch of ocean today. It began the very next year, and it has run nearly every season since. Aircraft and ships track the bergs coming down from the north, plot where they are drifting, and broadcast their positions to everyone at sea. In more than a century of patrol, no vessel heeding those warnings has been lost to ice in that region. It is a quiet service, largely unremarked, flying long, patient patterns over grey water each spring. Nothing dramatic ever happens, and that is entirely the point. Every one of those flights is, in its way, still keeping watch on her behalf. Somewhere over the North Atlantic tonight, someone is counting icebergs and writing down where they are going, so that no ship ever again meets the sea the way it was met by the floating city. Her sister ship sailed on for another 20 years. Olympic was launched first, nearly identical, and she had a long and useful working life. She was refitted with more lifeboats and a stronger inner hull. She carried troops through a war, and then she came home and went back to carrying passengers across the Atlantic. Her crews were fond of her. She earned the nickname Old Reliable, and she kept it honestly through decades of crossings. When she was finally retired, much of her beautiful woodwork was taken out and sold, and a good deal of it survives. There is a hotel in the north of England whose rooms are panelled in it, so the interiors you have wandered through tonight are not entirely gone. Some of them are still standing, warm and lit, with people eating dinner beneath them. The wreck was not found for over 70 years. Many expeditions went looking, some well-funded and some barely funded at all, and the ocean kept its secret through every one of them. She was found in 1985 by a joint French and American team towing a camera sled slowly across the seabed. They did not search for the hull. They searched for the debris, the long, faint trail of small things that any wreck scatters as it goes down, reasoning that a trail is far wider than a ship and much easier to cross. It worked. The trail led them onward through the mud like a path. In the small hours of the morning, a boiler came up on the monitor, and the search was over. 70 years of patience ended by one good idea and a slow camera moving through the dark. She lies in two pieces, 2.5 miles down. The bow and the stern rest about 1/3 of a mile apart on a soft, pale plain of sediment, with a scatter of belongings settled between them. The bow drove into the mud and is held there, still recognizably a ship, her railings in place. The stern lies further off, quieter still. It is very dark down there and very cold and very still. The pressure is enormous and the water barely moves at all. Nothing down there is in any kind of hurry. Even now, as you rest, that plain is exactly as quiet as it has been for the last 100 years, undisturbed, unhurried, lit only by whatever small creatures carry their own light. She is not lost. We know precisely where she is. She is simply somewhere that no one needs to go. In the cold and the dark, she is very slowly returning to the sea. There is a kind of bacteria down there that feeds on iron. It gathers on her steel in soft, rust-colored drapes that hang from her railings and her window frames, and scientists have given them a lovely name: rusticles. They grow much like icicles, and like icicles they eventually fall. Some of them are as long as an arm. Over long spans of time, the metal is being taken back, particle by particle, into the water around her. It is not decay in any ugly sense. It is the ocean gently folding her back into itself, the way it folds everything in the end. No hurry, no noise, just the slow, patient chemistry of the deep sea, working quietly on a ship that has finally, after everything, been allowed to rest. And now the great ship begins to fade behind your thoughts. We have drifted through 100 quiet truths tonight, and there is nothing left for you to hold on to. We walked her decks, acres of polished pine, miles of walking, without ever leaving the ship. We stood in her kitchens among the flour and the fresh bread and the ice cream churned at sea. We listened to her whistles carrying for miles across open water. We looked in on the mechanical camel in her gymnasium and the ivy growing on the walls of her veranda cafe, and the little dogs being walked each morning by a steward who had grown fond of them. We watched the ice come south, the way it always has and always will, and we stood together under a sky with no moon in it and more stars than anyone on board could count. She is remembered. That is the thing to carry with you into sleep. She is remembered carefully by people who never met her more than a century on. The sea above her is calm tonight, and the ice still drifts south each spring, counted now and watched and written down. Ships pass over her in the dark, with their lights burning and their radios listening, safer than they used to be because of her. The ocean keeps its own slow time, the way it always has, warming late and cooling late, turning its great cold body over, without any need of us at all. Everything out there is continuing gently, and none of it asks anything of you tonight. The floating city is at rest, and the world above her goes on quietly and kindly and entirely without your help. So let go of the day now, let your shoulders drop, let your jaw unclench and let your hands lie open and easy. Let your breathing slow, one soft breath and then another, no deeper than is comfortable. If a thought arrives, let it pass by like a footstep in a corridor, heard and then gone. You have nowhere to be and nothing at all to solve. The ship is quiet, the sea is quiet, and so are you. Rest now and let the night carry you the rest of the way. Sleep well and good night.